Well, everyone, thank you. Thanks for being here. For anyone that doesn't know me, my name is Barry Cranford. I'm the organizer of the London CTOs. A quick show of hands, is anyone's first CTO Lunch Club? Not there? Okay, a few hands up there, good, which means most of you are coming back for more, which is awesome. Must be doing something right. So this came about originally because we run these unconferences. If you haven't been to one, come to one. They're awesome. They're run by Stuart Wave. That guy there. He is phenomenal at facilitating these conferences and allowing everyone a space to speak. So we always get loads of sessions that are suggested at these conferences. We never get enough time to go through all of them. So the Lunch Club started just as a way to try and let the unconference bleed into the community a bit more and kind of run. So we initially wanted to do, well, I initially wanted to do one a day. Kelsey made me do one a week. So that's now what we do. Each week is a different host, usually a CTO, usually a member. If you're interested, if you see Rob today and you think that looks fun, I'd fancy giving it a go. Speak to myself or speak to Chelsea. I think we're booked now to the end of May, but taking time in June. Another thing, very shortly, Chelsea will put a document onto the chat window there, and it's just a chance for you to put your LinkedIn address on there, connect with other people on the call. Clearly, this is a topic which has brought you all together, so you're connecting with 30 or so other people who have similar interests. We run another thing called the CTO Job Club. So we're a recruitment company. We don't place CTOs, we place engineers. But we run this job club as a way for CTOs to meet other CTOs and have a bit of support in the job search process. One of the things we've learned more than anything else is that most work comes through your network. Most roles come through your network. I had someone just comment on LinkedIn that your network is your net worth. And it's the same. You see the same thing over and over again. So I'd highly recommend, if you see names on that list, especially if people are talking about things you're interested in or bring up comments, connect, share, and get to know other people. We also have a lunch club WhatsApp group on there as well that you're welcome to join. Anyway, that is enough from me. So I'll button it from here and hand over to Mr. Rob Cherry.
Thank you very much, Barry. Appreciate that. So if you guys are interested in presenting, I'm going to set the bar very low. So I have no doubt the rest of you can come in and smash it. And it's always great to see what other people have to say. I'm Rob. I am a CTO by trade. Started off as a software engineer and slowly moved my way up to the ranks, to the point where I've sat on a few executives over my time, worked with a lot of investors, done a lot of tech due diligence, been through a couple of acquisitions and purchases. So I've been around and seen a few things. I've definitely got the scars that go with all of that, as I'm sure many of you have. So, and thank you very much for coming to listen to me today. Has everybody had lunch at this point? I hope so. Good. So you're ready for your post-lunch nap. This is a great place to take a sleep. I will not be offended if you do. Okay. Today we're going to talk about technical debt. Why technical debt? It's an evergreen topic and everyone loves to talk about it. But honestly, I do have a bit of a bugbear about technical debt, which we'll come to in a moment. Useful context for this discussion, and it is going to be a discussion. I like audience participation because it means I have to do less, frankly, if we're honest. But also, we all get to learn from each other, which I think is awesome. I believe that the problem that the words technical debt tried to convey exists. I mean, both Tony and Deepak, when we were early on the call, were saying, Tony was like, this is an evergreen problem that we do need to deal with. And that is very true. And Deepak said, this is always floating around. And this is very true. So I don't take issue with the concept that the words try to convey at all. I just think that in certain contexts, this is not the right approach. And I think that's very important. The context is key here. As senior technical leaders, you interface with the business. And I think when we interface with the business and we talk about technical debt, it really, really, really hurts us. Inside your technical teams, with your engineers and your QAs, if you want to use the words technical debt, I have no problem with that. Every speciality has got its own jargon and lingo that it uses to communicate effectively, and we're no different, so go all out. But I think when you talk to the business, this is a really, really bad way to go. And I'm going to walk through why. I'm also open to being convinced otherwise at the same time. So that's perfectly fine. So there is audience participation, which I have warned you about. We're all here to challenge and learn. So hopefully, so I want to learn something from this conversation. I would like some payments as well, which I didn't mention to Barry. But on the board, I share at some that I'll share at some point. It's a very simple payment. There's a little column called like, where do you get your technical news? And if you are bored while I'm talking, just drop something in there. I'd like to know what sources people use to keep up to date. If you don't want to, that's perfectly fine as well. Cool. Uh, Raise your hand and ask questions or interject and say, Rob, I don't agree with you. That's perfectly fine as well. I can't see everyone on the screen, so but I will try and keep track of it all. So just a quick recap of where technical debt came from. I don't want to spend more than a minute on this, but it gives us a good shared context to work from. Okay, so it's coined back in 1992. And basically, the whole concept was we take shortcuts now that move us forward quickly, but we need to pay them back later. Okay. I mean, that is really, really the whole thing. And if we take too many shortcuts, then these accumulate and they become a drag and the team stalls at the end of the day. Much like exactly as Ward Cunningham meant it, take a loan now to buy an asset. Hopefully the asset grows and appreciates in time, but you got to pay the loan back. Yeah, it's not for free. Okay. So that's kind of where we are at this point in time. If we're going to rephrase technical debt to business debt, I'll be immensely happy. Revenue drag is a term I've heard recently. I think it's very clever. Revenue drag. I do like that one. I had to think about that one a little bit. Now, as I said before, I think as senior technical leaders, we should stop using the term technical debt when we talk to the rest of the business. Okay. It obscures things. It just lets teams off the hooks for things that aren't really technical debts, in my opinion. And it just makes things a lot more difficult, particularly because the word debt in particular, has meaning very, very different in a lot of industries, particularly the CFO and the COO, who are normally two very financially minded people. And the word debt is very specific to them at the end of the day. The first major problem I have with this is the actual words technical and debt. Okay, so words have power at the end of the day. And any of you who sat on an executive team or worked with people outside the business know that these people mostly speak in revenue and cost driven terms. Okay, they're very much not technically minded. In fact, as a CTO, it's often your job to bridge the gap between the business and technology. And that inevitably means learning the technical speak. And when we say the words technical debt, in fact, let me ask another question. Let's say you're sitting in an executive meeting and the CPO, the Chief People Officer, stood up and said, we have a massive HR problem. What would your reaction in the meeting be? Be like, well, I'm here, I'm going to listen, but it sounds like a you problem. So I'm sympathetic, but really you're probably going to have to fix it yourself. And so when we say the words technical debt, that's how it comes across a lot. I've learned this a lot. You say technical and people think, oh, that's an ITU problem. That's a you problem. And then when you say the word debt, the next problem you have is people go, debt, that's quantifiable. We can definitely put a number on that. And I think the one thing we all know when you want to quantify technical debt is it actually gets quite difficult quite quickly. Actually put a precise number on. If I go back and refactor this, how much time am I going to save? What's it going to be worth? Things like that. It gets very difficult. And I think these two words actually do us a major disservice at the end of the day. And that's one of the key reasons why we should stop using them at the end of the day. Okay, now, next is up for participation time. I did warn you this was coming. So I'm dropping a link into the chat now. I really hope this works because I haven't used Miro before, but Miro wasn't working for me. I would like you to go into the Miro board. I dropped into the link. Can everyone access it? If you can't, please shout out and say so. And you should see 4 columns over there. Let's get in, or 4 areas. I'm just going to go in as well quickly. There we go. Is everyone in? Yeah, oh, I can see lots of movement. This is fantastic, fantastic. Okay, first one, what qualifies as technical debt? I would like everyone just to go in and start writing down. And I'm going to give everyone, let's say 2 minutes. We'll time this out. I didn't put a timer on there. Bad shame on me, but I can just start my clock on my thing. Not adding monitoring and alerting, I like that. Whatever's making building new features and products slower and more painful, awesome. Dead code, impact to cycle time. I love cycle time. Actually, I really do. I think it's one of the most underused.
I'm assuming you can see in real time what we're typing, right? So
Yes,
we need to
I
be
can.
very careful not to.
Oh, I'm not just going to read it out. So if you do accidentally type something, don't worry
I'll
about
type it and delete it very quickly.
No, no, that's fine. I think don't worry. It's the kind of like faded out as you're typing, so I won't read that. JFDIs. Ooh, it's lovely. Undocumented code. Nice. All packages and components. MVP, quick code, unaddressed known bugs. Yeah, yeah. Shortcuts. Shortcuts. I feel like that's a bit contentious, that one. Oh, let's see. What do we got going over here? Decommissioning legacy applications in language. Yeah, 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 for sure. Wow. Okay, this is more participation than I expected. Copy paste and just keep adding, guys. And I'll leave this up afterwards as well. People want to actually go through it and see. Okay, we got about like 30 seconds left. So this is very cool. Bad poor choices in hindsight. Now you see that is one of the most interesting ones. Well, I think we should have a little bit of discussion about whoever put that in. Who put in bad/poor choices in hindsight? Sorry, I'm actually not looking at the hands raised screen. No, be great because yeah, I think that's a very all right. We're at our 2 minute mark, guys. We'll carry on. So I think that was brilliant. That was amazing because I think this highlights one of the next big issues I have with technical debt. If you look at what you guys have put there, it's just a slew of issues. This term has now become the catch-all bucket for basically anything we think is bad. Okay, it's like code and design debt. Now, I think when Ward Cunningham talked about this, he was mostly on the code and design debt parts of things. But we have now gone all the way up to product and feature level debt. Like it's technical debt if the requirements are wrong. And I think that's it's kind of like these get really tricky to solve, Technical debt, like, I think did anyone ever read Fred Brooks's Mythical Man Month? Okay. In that book, he proposes that you first build the system to work out what you should build and then build the real thing. Okay. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever convinced your stakeholders to build the system twice. Like we almost never get there. Yeah. The point is like the term has become so big and so confused it's not really very helpful anymore. And the reason this is a problem is because when you're in an organization and you use the word technical debt, okay, if you're very lucky, the other senior executives in the organization are sympathetic to the term, okay? That is not the case, in my experience at least, most of the time. And what you end up with there is what we call the double sell. Okay, which if you speak to any sales guy, they hate the double sell. The double sell is first you have to educate someone on what this means. And then you have to educate them on why it's important and they should invest on it. And that's like a salesperson doing the double sell. It's like you have to sell to the person who wants your product but can't buy it. And then once they bought in, then you have to go and sell to the person who can actually sign the check. It's very, very painful. Most salespeople try and avoid that process like the plague. And it's the same with technical debt. And things get confused very easily and very, very quickly at the end of the day to the point actually where I found a few great choice quotes while I was doing my research for this from like stalwarts in our industry. Okay, and they just I think show the diametrically opposed opinions that people have on this technical term, which is like you've got Robert Martin saying, sloppy, low quality code should not be dignified as debt. Okay, so when you take a shortcut, is that sloppy or low quality? And you've got Martin Fowler who says, well, actually that doesn't matter. It's more just about how the metaphor works. And I found a great study from the Finnish SME, which found that actually most technical debts they, in their study, found it was in requirements and automation debt, which is completely nothing to do with the code. You can have beautiful code written to meet the wrong requirements. Yeah. And now that's considered technical debt. It gets really tricky. Okay. So when you're trying to educate your stakeholders as well, there's all of this information around what has become a very amorphous term, and it's very difficult to work with at the end of the day. Second round of participation. So bearing all that in mind, I think if you go in and back to the board, you'll see another thing. It's like, what's the last thing your team called technical debt that you really wouldn't consider technical debt? Like a bad process is bad, or lack of process actually technical debt? Or does it highlight maybe a lack of leadership skill or something else? You know, what is behind all these technical debt things? And I will limit this to 1 minute. I think you guys can do 1 minute there. Let's see, what have we got going? Yeah, what's everyone talking? Fundamentally bad system architecture. That's interesting. Lack of long-term vision. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the times it's like when we start to build stuff, it's only when we've finished that a lot of the times we realize we know what we should have built. And then what do you do? What do you do? The last 10% of the project abandoned to move to the next issue. Compromised testing, no automation. Yeah, another 15 seconds. Prioritizing speed of delivery over long-term stability to get to the next fundraise. Yeah, man. All right, 10 more seconds. Cool. Does someone want to? There's some very, very interesting things in that column. Does someone who want to wrote something speak up about what they wrote and why they don't think it's technical debt?
Well, I will. I was the one who wrote fundamentally bad system architecture. It was shocking, sort of thing that someone might have done in their back bedroom back in the 1990s. And the dev team were claiming it was just technical debt. And it wasn't. It was a technical car crash.
So how did you actually deal with that?
It took a lot of persuasion and sitting down and actually picking the architecture apart and redesigning it with them, taking them on the journey, showing them that the way it had been done was fundamentally was never going to scale.
Yeah, I mean that
it did take a while, but finally everything clicked and people started acting like proper software engineers.
Okay, Daniel, I see your hand up. I just wanted to finish talking on what James said. So James, and I think this is interesting because essentially we end up with this weird matrix over here. And I think, James, what you're talking about is what we would put in the reckless quadrant, which in financial terms would be the equivalent of taking out a high interest payday loan without even understanding how you repay it. And when we push this debt and financial metaphor, the financially educated people in the room, if they look at that, they go, why should we help you fix that problem? That sounds crazy. Daniel?
Yeah, one thing that I added that you've made me think about was the actual like current existing system that is profitable and it's just looked as technical debt, and rather than looking at it as an opportunity of what do we pick up from that as lessons learned, it's pretty much we want to do greenfield, we don't want to care about that. And I think that was an interesting way of looking at like actually the thing that is keeping this business running is looked at as overall technical debt rather than having strategic value for what we want to accomplish.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, if that system is creating no drag beyond basic maintenance, does it actually qualify as technical debt? Yeah. In fact, here's a great question for the crowd. You can just vote with a thumbs up. If you take a shortcut and then you never have to come back and look at it ever again, is that still technical debt? Thumbs up for people who think it is. Just 50 minutes. Oh, no one. Wow. Thumbs up for people who, oh, James does. Okay, great. We got one there. I'm not showing up on my screen, which is annoying. Let me see if I can get the participant list up. And thumbs up for people who think it's not technical debt. If you never have to come back. Yeah, okay. So we got a few more there. And then there's a lot of people who just like no thumbs up. Fell asleep during the presentation. Fair enough. Okay. Great.
Well, it depends how you frame the question, because if it's you as an individual, it might not be tech debt. If you leave the company, it's some poor sod's tech debt they have to deal with 3 years down the line.
So, Tony, you see now, I think that's a great point, because something that wasn't tech debt could become tech debt. This is why I love the term drag, if something is not creating drag, it's probably not a problem. Yes, Rich.
So who is allowed to call something technical debt? I mean, that sort of goes back to, I mentioned something in the chat group saying, if it isn't acknowledged as a decision, is it even qualifying as technical debt? Or are the wrong people making the decisions? Who's got the right to call something debt? Because they may be making choices that they're not empowered to make. And it's laziness, or you're making a decision over your pay grade.
So that is, Rich, a very, very interesting question that I never ever considered. I think, and I'd love other people to chime in there. My whole thing with this is like, as we come to later in the presentation, I have a different way of thinking about this problem, as opposed to using the words technical debt, which I think makes it a little bit clearer and easier to work out where you should focus the effort. But what do other people think on Rich's point about like who should be allowed to call things technical debt? Anyone, as long as they can make a solid case. All right. Yeah, fair enough. Any other opinions? Just unmute yourself and speak, please, if you want to.
Well, it sounds like it's either technical debt or it's not. That's the only debt you've got, right? So of course, what are people going to do? They're going to squeeze it in. I put in the chat that Mike Beadle, when he came up with Enterprise Scrum, identified many other types of debt around decisions, marketing, motivation, learning, and all these sorts of things. And they all seem to be things that we need to monitor and manage and on an ongoing basis. But if you only give people one option of what debt is it, and it's technical debt, people are, I presume, going to say, yeah, I can justify, blame, whatever it is, by labeling it as such.
Yeah, that's a very interesting insight. So you're basically saying that if you want to get something fixed, you've got one option, and that's to call it technical debt, and thus we will all do that.
Well, I suspect that. I don't know,
Yeah.
but I'd be interested in how other people hear it from, other departments and other approaches. Whether they say, as you said earlier, we've got an HR debt, we've got a we've got a decision-making debt, we've got a risk debt, we've got and all the different types of risk.
So I think this is such a good and interesting discussion because let me ask you a question. When the company takes on a loan to achieve something, does that become like financial debt in that it's the finance department's problem to repay? Or is it company debt? Where the whole company...
Yeah,
Well,
I think it's company.
And if you don't have to pay it back, is it a debt at all?
Yeah, but I think this is a very interesting thing where I do wonder sometimes, why do we as senior technical leaders do this to ourselves? Other departments, when the company invests in something, it doesn't become that department's debt. It's just the company debt for the benefit of the company. Yeah. Yet we, through the use of our terminology, kind of go like, we own this debt. It is ours to pay down and repay. And that's why I go back to like, I don't like the words. I think they're very, very harmful in the discussion. I've sat in many meetings and I never hear the word debt from any other department. And I'd love to hear someone who does. I hear risk, I hear cost, I hear revenue. These are the three key discussion points that everyone talks about. They never really talk about debt unless it's for the whole company, like we're taking out a big loan to fund something. Has anyone had the alternative experience where you've acquired HR debt? Interesting.
I suppose there's a position around product debt, for instance. So if you're developing a service or a product, and decisions are made by the team that are building that product, that we would call a technical debt in IT. I'd like to do this, but we made a decision to do something else instead. The knock-on impact, the example you've just discussed, Rob, is it is owned by the business because the product, whoever owns the product is going to own that debt as well. And whoever wants to sell that product is going to own that debt, because what's going to happen is somebody's going to say, I love this feature. Have you got it? Oh, no, I haven't got it. Well, why haven't you got it? Well, we took a decision and you work backwards. And that's why I don't think you can call something a debt until it's been acknowledged. So looking at a loan book as an example, is it a debt unless it's written down and acknowledged as a debt? It's a missing piece of a jigsaw, but it's not something that people are focused on. So the important thing is it's acknowledged, but I absolutely agree with what you're saying. It doesn't help to call it technical debt, because some people will go, it's not mine to worry about, but it is theirs to worry about.
Excellent point, Rich.
I was going to ask about the opposite side. You're talking about the debt or taking on a loan, but the assets. How many work with their finance department who want to know how many hours the engineers have spent, so they can log that as creating an asset. So they put that on the capital expense, not the running costs. So, and they they put an asset value to the time that was spent. So finance are tracking the software that was created as an asset and putting the time as the asset value of it often. So should they not be putting the potential, because is it fully asset? Is it fully worth that? It's only an asset until you realize it, that selling it, to sell it as a thing. So should we be tracking both the asset and the debt value and thinking in that way? That's why my interest in thinking about more financially about technical debt than because as you say, it needs to be quantifiable if it's a debt.
Yeah. And David, have you ever had a discussion like that with the CFO? And if so, how did it go?
No, it's all like this is how we do it to make sure that when we do our tax returns, they're the best we can do. So
yes, of course, yes, capitalizing development.
Capitalizing the development means it's a capital expense, so we can write it off in different ways.
Yeah. Tony?
I think you kind of mentioned it a little bit, I think, but I think there's also an owner debt as well, as to who actually owns whatever the tech is doing, who's responsible for it.
Yeah.
And I kind of smirk when I overhear. So my wife works in reference data operations for a US investment bank, and their tech team is terrible. It's essentially ship the code and throw the fence. It's not my problem. It's ops problem now. And again, who actually owns the problem? And it's unclear. Yeah. And I think maybe I'm not sure how relevant this is, but from a data engineering perspective, there's a concept of actually creating data contracts. As to who is actually the owner of the data itself, and is that relevant from a tech debt and an IT delivery perspective? I'm not sure.
Robin?
Yeah, I was going to contribute on coming back to the conversation with this CFO. If you're at a spot where you're 100% capitalizing all of the time that you and your development team is spending on building this asset called your product or your technical infrastructure, then you got a problem, because no team is 100% effective and 100% perfect and delivering a 100% no maintenance required product. Some teams are are delivering code and systems to the point where they need to be maintained at 2% a year, and other teams are delivering at the point where they need to be maintained 50% a year, and you've got a different depreciation rate depending on the tech, the quality of the nature of what's being delivered. And the problem that we experience in the technical leadership is when the gap between what we've actually been doing and the efficiency of which we were doing it at, or our teams, differs from what the company is accounting for that asset at. If the company thinks you've got a £100 million asset, but we know it's 90% junk and therefore it's only worth 10, there's going to be somebody disappointed when we're recommending to declare bankruptcy on the asset, and the CFO wants to sell it on to a buyer. It all comes down to a mismatch between capitalization, maintenance, and depreciation on the asset. Different types of asset are going to be depreciating at very different rates depending on what tech is underpinning.
Yeah. Thanks for that insight, Robin. Yes, the capitalization of engineering time sounds very seductive, but as you just pointed out, can be quite problematic if not done very carefully. So yeah. So this is my whole thing in life. Technical debt as a term, it's just messy, it's confusing. So when you're outside of technology, just don't talk about it. That's my whole shtick in life. Just don't really talk about technical debt. It really, really doesn't matter. But if you can't talk about that, what can you talk about? I think this is where I've had to learn as an engineering leader that I need to bridge the gap up to the business, right? And really, once you do that, there are only three levers that you can pull. You've got revenue, because businesses like to make money. CEOs, CFOs, COOs, they all understand that. Cost, which is the opposite side of revenue, and risk. And I'll be very curious to see what happens with risk, because risk is normally the default that a lot of engineering leaders go to, because it's easy to explain. It's the one that normally resonates the least with the senior executive team, because it's just distant and may not actually happen. It's not an immediate here now thing. Although after Marks and Spencers, I'll be very, very keen to see what actually happens in terms of like raising risks and for investment purposes and stuff like that. But these are your three key levers that you can pull. If you find yourself in a scenario where risk is the only lever you can pull, I normally find there's a way to back walk risk into like some sort of revenue loss scenario. Like if this happened at this rate, we could back walk that. So when dealing with this is how I would look at it. The net results of this, though, is this is actually a lot more work to do. Okay, if you want to actually quantify to some degree impact on revenue, or quantify to some degree to impact on cost, there's actually a lot more legwork to do. But I think it is good to do the additional legwork because it stands up to scrutiny. Okay, so I think, to be clear, when I'm talking about technical debt here, I'm not talking about you want to take 20% of a sprint to fix a few problems. Okay, I think that's an internal concept that you can just budget for by yourself. We're talking like, I need £500,000 to get rid of this problem that we have at that point. Right? That's kind of like, we're talking multiple hundreds of thousands up to millions potentially, depending on what you are lucky enough to inherit at the end of the day. And when you're asking for that level of commitment, there is going to be scrutiny. It's highly unlikely people are just going to sign off a check unless you're so lucky you're at a company that's got so much money they don't really care. At the end of the day, and so these do require more legwork, but they stand up to a lot more scrutiny, and they force you to think through everything. Now, I know it's easy for me to put these things up and say, "Oh, go look at revenue," because it's like, well, how do you actually do that? So I've actually come up with some really simple examples for everyone, just to go through. Nothing crazy. About how you could quantify revenue, cost, or risk at the end of the day. I think one of the best ways I've come across quantifying revenue is delayed feature launches. Like if you know that something is impacting your feature launches quite regularly, and those feature launches, and you've done the homework, I really, really hope you've done the homework to tie your features back to business metrics. Otherwise, we're just in feature factory mode, and that can be very dangerous because then we're just a cost center, not a revenue center. It is actually possible to quantify, like, how much is this costing me, and what opportunities am I missing? Okay, so the other one is it's just more like you can show something like we need to fix the performance, for example, because the performance is negatively impacting one of our key metrics, and that negative impact is cost of delay. Thanks, Stuart. Appreciate that. I'll probably search up on that. But hey, Stuart, I reckon it's probably a couple of good articles. So, and you can start to really quantify these things. Now, I also think about quantifying them. You force your engineering teams to actually start to really perceive how much they're actually worth. Because a lot of times people complain about things, but from a business perspective, and as a senior technical leader, that is the perspective you need to be taking. Sometimes it's just not worth fixing. At the end of the day, we can't fix everything, and there has to be a priority, and some things are just, once you quantify them, not worth it. Has anyone else had any experience quantifying technical debt from a revenue perspective? I'd really love to hear. No worries. Cost. Oh yes, go, Rich.
Sorry, I was slow getting off there.
No.
Mainly from a service perspective. So there was debt across the estate when I was working for a media business. And basically, we had people coming in overnight, having to reboot, stop things falling out, and they took a decision to quantify the debt. And we didn't talk about it as technical debt. It was, look, these are the impacts, the potential impact risk to our business if we don't sort these things out. And it was really taking the executive board on a journey that said, look, if we don't do this, we ain't in a position to modernize anyway. So we're going to have to do these things. And that was also led to quite a lot of cultural change within the IT team around their attitude towards service and what was definition of done was, and what reached the standard that needed to be what we needed to operate at. So it was a massive change in that business.
Fantastic. That's a really cool story. I like that. That's a great example of technical debt, not phrased as technical debt. And you're speaking the language the CFO loves there. So that's great.
I've got one as well, actually, which was actually, it was fairly easy to quantify because it was technical debt was causing a fairly major warranty issue. So I developed a revenue model calculating what we anticipated the overall warranty return cost would be. I mean, that was just spending a few weeks crunching numbers and looking at return numbers as they came in over time. But that was one which was very easy to present to the CFO because it was in pounds, shillings, and pence. And he had a monthly burn down of this is how much we're expecting to be. This warranty issue going to be costing us over the next 3-4 years, because it was literally millions of units out in the field. But on a sort of more day-to-day basis, I find using just tools like Jira, you can look at you can quantify technical debt in your backlog and see how much time and how much money you've spent on fixing similar issues in the past, and you can sort of extrapolate from that. But that's a little bit more nebulous now.
No, that's a great example, James. Robin?
I was going to bring an example around the ability to respond to competitive pressure. If you've got a, I was working in a telco context where you do a good sort of half year's business in the 6 weeks before Christmas, and we had quite a long IT project leading to it was number one in the company for about 3 years, in terms of transformation. But once that was completed, what we found was your competitors traditionally would launch a promotion, you'd launch a promotion, and if your promotion was better, you'd win the next 2 weeks because that's how long it would take for every organization to be able to respond to any promotional activity. But because we had eliminated that technical debt, we found we could respond with 12 hours notice. And that was a 3-year effort to get to this point where we could respond with 12 hours notice. But what that meant was for the next 3 Christmases, we won the Christmas battle, which meant that, instead of having 1/3 of the acquisition that then got, competed out of us, we ended up with 100% of the acquisition for every Christmas for 3 years, which was a pretty significant competitive marketing position. And, that was an IT strategy that led to clear revenue uptake.
Robin, that is an awesome example. Particularly, I love the timeline in that as well. invest 3 years, but the payoff for the company is huge in terms of revenue and business.
Yeah, but this competitive response wasn't the reason for that 3-year investment and the 3-year consolidation. It was just more along the lines of, we've got so many billing systems that we need to do something about it. But this was the ultimate acquisition line response. There were other revenue upticks and elements in it. Telco's a big business. So.
Sounds like a well thought through plan, though. And
yeah,
cool to hear about. Super cool to hear.
Amazing.
Awesome, Mark.
Yeah, I've been in a somewhat different situation where we had £80,000 revenue per month coming in, and we decided that because of technical debt, that sum was entirely imperiled, and we decided to spend $12,000 a month digging our way out of the hole simply by increasing the size of our database server.
Yeah, that can definitely be cheaper than actually rewrite. I like that as well. What can we pay to get out of this problem? I like that.
Yeah, we didn't have the resource to get us out of the problem at that time, but yeah, that was the situation I was in.
Fantastic. Bruce?
I think there's a really simple thing here which I've seen, which is around developer attrition. So if they're dealing with buggy software the whole time, it's been a pain in the ass and the developer experience isn't very good. your churn's going to go up quite a lot, and that's really expensive too.
Oh, I like that. I like that because, as we all know, and I think Barry would appreciate and tell you, the true cost of recruitment is very expensive. That's a great one, Bruce. I'm actually noting that down. Developer attrition. Yeah, I like that. Awesome. And then never mind the upskill time when someone new joins before they can actually be productive and all of the stuff that goes with that. Fantastic, fantastic. Cool. Yeah, so then quantifying costs, a couple of simple examples. I must say developer productivity loss I quite like. The reason I like this is it's a number that exists in perpetuity until the problem is solved. Okay. You're essentially paying whatever the money works out to every month to keep the problem going. And the one thing that really appeals to a CFO is getting rid of costs that occur in perpetuity, right? It is a great talking point. So that's kind of my, if you're going to go with the cost one, I think that's a great way to do it. Sorry, I do apologize who said on the call, use Jira, keep stuff tracked in your backlog. You can put the numbers together fairly straightforward. And then there's risk as well. So this, as I said, for me, this is obviously the more amorphous one, but I'll be very curious to see what happens with post Marks and Spencers and Harrods and all of these guys who are really having a rough time of it. But the one area you can lean on quite well, I have found, is security exposure. And the reason you can lean on it quite well is because if you are found to be in breach of good security practice, most of the insurance providers will invalidate your security insurance. Okay. So what that means is whatever cover the business thought they had, they probably won't have anymore. And that can often be used to leverage open a conversation about how certain things need to be fixed. System downtime as well is quite another big one that you can use. What's the risk if your system goes offline? How much you're going to lose while it's offline, and how much is it going to cost you to recover? And if you can tie that back to any sort of fragility in the code that you need to fix, that can be a very, very motivating. Yes, insurance will always take your money but not pay out. That's the general business model they like to run. And I actually have a friend who works in the cyber insurance industry, so I'm well familiar with the things they look at. So those are the general approaches you can take, but just push revenue, cost, and risk. Okay. And then final participation time. I mean, we already had this bit of a discussion, but does anyone want to go on just for 1 minute, list down the quantification techniques you've learned so that other people can take them away if they haven't been able to take notes? We'll just do it for a minute, and then I think we're done. We're done. You're free.
I just wanted to add something around the cost, Rob, and it's been mentioned, cost of replacing talent and churn and, people getting fed up. There's another cost there, which is people getting very disengaged, and, it's just not fun to work on technical debt or to work on, legacy systems and systems that don't work. So the cost there is the cost of developers not being fully engaged and not really, ultimately not performing.
Yep, definitely. Yes, nobody likes to work on a build site. It's always hard going that one. And as I say, guys, that ends my diatribe on why you should not use the word technical debt. I hope I've convinced a few of you. I really, really do. So that we can all enter this new brave world together where we talk in the business terms. Does anybody have something they would like to add or open up for discussion?
Could I ask something, please? Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. In the quantifying risk slide, there's an example. Estimation cost of breach mitigation, 10,000 to 50,000, risk probability low, and that reduces the risk exposure. Is risk exposure calculated in that way? To me, on an intuitive level, it looks like the risk exposure is between 10 and 50,000 pounds with a probability of between 10 and 20% of that happening.
Yes.
It's a far more scary number.
Yes, you can present it that way. In fact, Mark, you're right. That would be a much more impactful way, shall we say, to present that number. Good call, good catch. I like that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so just my experience with tech debt scaling a team of 5 to 20, so super chaotic. And everybody, the not techies, we're using tech debt for everything. So it was a jolly word that everything was a tech debt. So I did exactly what you suggest to do, try to give any piece of work, remove the tech debt for any piece of work, and it has to have a reason, business, cost, risk. And then at some point, it has to do a due diligence that requires to have a risk registry. So that has to list all the recent risks that we have because the code was not documented, because blah, 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 blah. And it had to shift into that direction. But it's very hard, especially for not techies, that they love to use the tech debt.
Yes.
CEO, marketing, product, they love tech debt.
Yes, I think as Stuart mentioned, I think he is very right. Psychologically, it's the easy catch-all term to avoid doing the hard work. I think, as I say, what I found is that teams often want space to fix things where they're taking shortcuts. And if you can fit that into your 20% of a sprint or 20% of your Kanban or feature time, I would say you just go ahead and do that in terms of your budgeting. And if people ask, you can explain it. I think these investing in like risk and working it out, these are when you've got bigger things, like it's not just a little thing I need to fix. We have to replace this whole area because it's going to cause us major problems at the end of the day. And as I said, I like the term revenue drag. I think that speaks far more clearly to the rest of the executive team. All of a sudden, it's like a drag on us achieving things, and people are a bit more receptive at the end of the day. Cool. Thanks, Sebastian. Appreciate that. Anything else, guys? Otherwise, I'll give you 10 minutes of your day back.
Could I ask one thing? How many people here actually schedule a percentage of development time into refactoring, please?
Yeah, let's come on, put your hands up, guys.
I don't know how we're going to do that. Can we run a poll anywhere or something?
I think you can, but we can also.
Oh, I see 1, 2, 3 hands up.
Yeah. 6, 8. Yeah, we're climbing. Excellent. Yeah, so at least 8 people do that at the end of the day.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I would do.
My hand was also a question as well, Rob.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, go.
I'm just curious. How does Mural compare to Miro?
The big difference I found was Mural gives you a free external link that you can just share, and Miro doesn't. so that's why I'm on Mural. So it's like you got to pay if you want to just share with non-logged in users on Miro.
Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, very similar product.
Yeah. Thanks.
Stuart,
Rob, I was going to come back on the scheduling and amount. I mean, I'm involved in Agile, Scrum, and all that sort of stuff. And so it would be on a much more ad hoc basis. It would be, while we're building this feature or making this improvement or working in this area, is it unstable? Is it risky? Is it poorly covered with automated tests, etc.? And so you'd build in that on every decision that you're making about delivering value, but also can we make improvements, maintenance, etc. at the same time? And that's always a trade-off. So you do it, knowing we've got to do this or we've got to do that. It would be on a much more granular level than sort of allocating 20% or 5% or whatever as a sort of general investment.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Stuart. I suppose to provide the opposing view of why I like to do that, it's because then the business gets used to paying that cost. And then there are less questions when they're asked to pay. And I've sometimes found when you do it the other way, and they're like, we're just doing feature. Okay, now we need to stop and do rework. They're like, whoa, we've never heard that before. What does that mean? So have you
so that's the, to me, it shouldn't be a thing at all, really. We should be focusing on as you keep coming back to, the bigger picture. What does this mean to the company? And we should just, as professionals, be maintaining and improving and those things, so we don't get to a point where, or it's much less likely we get to a point where we say we need to invest 50% of the next sprint or the next 3 sprints, or that doesn't make very much sense. It would be highly unusual in my experience for that to happen. if we keep paying attention to this debt and all the others like motivation, energy, and all those sorts of things. We could probably visualize that more. And as we were talking, the idea of I don't know if you've heard of donut economics, of those things that you're doing too much and those that you're not covering enough, and you can have a complete sort of, it's like a pie chart, but too big and too little. So I can share more about that. But that just came to me as we were talking through things.
Nice. James?
Yeah, the other thing that we haven't really covered is, as well as the financial risk, it's the reputational risk. I mean, I've worked in one organisation and they had a massive cyber backlog, and it just kept getting moved out because they weren't going to make any money out of fixing the cyber issues. And I felt like I was banging my head against a big brick wall, because I said, yeah, but then you get a cyber attack and all of that reputation you've got goes out the window. And actually, not in my area, thankfully, but they did suffer a massive cyber attack not long after I'd had that conversation. So, that sort of focused their mind. It cost them many digits of dollars. And that, reputation can take decades to build, and you can lose it in weeks, months, hours sometimes.
Good. That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And actually, a company's brand value is often on their balance sheets as well, if they're a big enough company. So very critical. Now, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask the question, and I think I want people to chime in. But what do people think the impact of AI-generated code is going to be on maintenance? Is our quality going to go up? Are we going to have a lot more maintenance of code that people don't quite understand? Are people optimistic? Are they pessimistic? What's the feeling? Mark?
Well, it's the modern day version of Chinese whispers, so to speak, but from a code perspective.
Yeah, go, Mark. Yep.
Yeah, I was talking to a relative of mine the other day who's also a techie, and he was talking about his experience vibe coding and suggesting that more and more of his time is going to be involved in exploring, understanding, and maintaining AI-generated code. And I think if we go too far down this route with uncontrolled development, unless AI techniques improve, we're possibly going to end up in some nightmare scenarios.
Okay. Robin?
Yeah, I was going to echo that. I think the success of AI-generated code won't come down to whether the AI generates the code well or not. It'll come down to whether your business can merge that code safely and can understand it at the point it's being incorporated. I wouldn't trust a product that's built from scratch by AI and then just deployed. I would want to make sure that there's a human in the loop, understanding it as it's developing it, and accepting those proposals. And then on top of that, you don't have Vibe test-driven development. You don't have Vibe, unit test suites. You don't have all of these artifacts that these artifacts and coding practices that we've created around regular coding, such that we can control, or we can mitigate risks created by poor quality code coming out of the human. The same artifacts are going to be required in a Vibe scenario, in an AI generated scenario, and the AI industry just hasn't gotten there yet. They will, so they'll reduce the risk of the product that they're producing. But I think there's a bunch of catastrophic learning to happen between now and then.
Let's just hope none of us on this call are on the wrong side of the catastrophic learning.
Well, now they're aware of the risks rather than it just being blindsided by it in 2 years' time. So,
yes. Anybody else? Anyone super positive about it?
I'm a bit positive about it. I think it's been an interesting experience because I've been playing with some colleagues on doing exactly a bit of like Vibe AI and literally accepting majority of the changes and then doing the pull request after and seeing just how bad things can get. But at the same time, because we've done it with TDD, it really demonstrates a bit of exactly this topic of accepting technical debt. Majority of businesses that I operated in, as long as you can get the business value, as long as you can get the profits, let's say, it doesn't really matter how good or bad the solution is. It doesn't matter that it's a pain to work in and implement new features or address technical bugs or something. And sometimes it can be really bad software with really bad UX, and it still turns a profit. And so our experience has been, as long as customers accept that it's going to be a terrible experience, but they're able to accomplish what they set out to do, it can actually work for a period of time. And so I think I'm a bit ambivalent. I definitely am on the higher quality of engineering. I want things to be highly performant and maintainable and limited in scope. And it creates an absolute mess, a spaghetti mess. But it's been improving. And so it's been interesting to see where this could potentially get to.
Bruce?
I think the level of POC sophistication that AI co-pilots have enabled has been fantastic where I am. So there's been UX designers who would have started with a wireframe, showed a wireframe, link it into cursor, hit go, hit OK a couple of times, and then end up with a usable interactive front end prototype. And you can even have a go at the back end as well. So it means that the delta between what they can demo and what the finished product is much, much smaller without much extra effort. So what gets quite difficult at the time is, yeah, that's great, I'll buy it. Salespeople get very, very trigger happy. Sounds good. Yeah, we can have it to you tomorrow. You could obviously see it and use it. We should demo, so you can start using it tomorrow. And it takes hey, wait a second, like this isn't fully built yet. It's just a prototype. So because AI has helped the prototypes become more sophisticated, what is a prototype, what isn't, is becoming much more blurred now.
Yeah, I think you can get rid of PRDs as well. I see we've hit 1:02, so I think Chelsea, can we take the last two things and then we wrap it up if that's okay? Anoop, I think you had your hand up there.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'll just quick. So, in the existing software development, like improving the tech debts, I can certainly see that we are able to have a productivity output with resolving technical debts using AI. But at the same time, I'm working on another projects where we are like building AI-based applications from scratch, and because AI technology are still like evolving, so probably I think in the long run, I would say there will be like similar kind of technical debt challenges that we would be have at least for the new set of AI applications, as with the emergent of new agentic patterns with AutoGen and even with Groove. So yeah, that's what I think I'm yeah.
Awesome. And Mark, you are the last man. No, Mark, maybe Mark.
Yep, 3 footnotes really. One is I agree entirely with Bruce's points about POCs. Secondly, I know a man whose entire business case is predicated on being able to refactor code and write test cases entirely with AI and remove humans from the loop. And he would maintain that this can be done and will be done. Thirdly, a very low-level point in my own experience, whenever I dabble with code, I've seen AI suggestions go remarkably wrong, but I've also seen some great suggestions which I've almost entirely taken on board into my code base, unchanged. And I wouldn't do any development work without some kind of AI presence looking over my shoulder at this particular point in time.
Awesome.
End.
Cool. All right. Well, listen, guys, we have overrun. I've been Rob. You've been great. And Chelsea, I'll hand back to you to wrap up the call.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for a great session. It was really interesting. And thank you, everyone, for interacting with the session and joining in. Really appreciated. If anyone would like to host a lunch club, please do let me know. My details are in the document. We will be back next week, and I hope to see you all then. Thanks a lot, everyone. I hope you have a great weekend. Bye.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, everyone.
Have a nice weekend.
Thank you for listening. Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Rob.
Bye.
Bye.